Thanks for joining us today on the Free Roll Podcast. I am Cameron. I'm here with Tim as always. Today we have an awesome guest, Ryan Morgan. He is a Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He is also the lead guitarist and does some background vocals for the super popular metalcore band Misery Signals. So we had an awesome time talking about music, talking about jiu-jitsu, talking about kind of everything in between. Super fun to have him on. Talked a lot of fun stuff. What do you think, man?
Yeah. Well, I geeked out for the musical part just because as soon as you guys started jumping in the 90s, I wanted to get in and flow with y'all, but I figured you guys probably knew a little bit more about Pearl Jam than I did.
And once we mentioned hip-hop, you were in.
And then as soon as hip-hop came in, I was all about it, yeah. So really we covered a great range of topics, and then as soon as the BJJ talk came in, I just kind of muted myself and got back to work.
Faded back out.
Yeah.
I don't think we even mentioned jiu-jitsu for like the first hour and a half. So if you want to skip to that point, go for it. Otherwise, the first hour is just music, geeking out.
It was awesome though.
Nostalgic. It's
yeah.
great.
I think everybody, especially like it's a cultural thing, man. And I think everybody gravitates towards certain things, but they all have very similar backgrounds or like points of view or interpretations of something, and I think art and music is something that is universal, so I don't think anybody's really gonna mind that you guys geeked on music, because this is something that your audience and my audience are both gonna be able to relate to.
Do you mean to tell me that other people also like music? That's
some people do,
like rock music and stuff.
Yeah. 80s rock, 90s rock.
It's all of it. Back
Talk
to
a little
70s,
Kurt Cobain.
Everything. Kurt Cobain. Yep. Grunge is so near and dear to my heart. I love it.
Yeah. The breakout on 30 different types of rock and roll.
God damn, the tree just keeps branching.
Yeah. It'll continue forever.
Well, stick around. Thanks for tuning in today. What do you got?
Well, all I got is that make sure you subscribe, give us 5 stars, pass the episode along, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Shut up and sit down.
Thanks for joining us on the Free Roll Podcast today. Today we got an awesome guest. It is Ryan Morgan. He is a Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He is also the lead guitarist and does background vocals sometimes, as he puts it, for the band Misery Signals. Is that right?
That's right.
Awesome.
That's me.
So I was in the past I had looked into your band when I first heard about them, and I listed them as metalcore, which I don't know if I'm old or out of touch, but can you define that for me?
Dude, I'd rather not, man. Like I feel like it's kind of cringy for anyone to like do the category thing with their music, you know? And like that one particularly, when you're in it, there's a bunch of cringy things about. And maybe that's true of any genre that you're in. Like you're more exposed to all the crappy versions of it.
Oh,
like,
totally.
So it's kind of painful for me that that's what it's called, but I think that's the most accurate thing to call it. You know what I mean?
Nice.
So it's rooted in hardcore music, like kind of that post-punk, like 80s and 90s, like really loud punk rock bands, basically, that started yelling. You know, that's kind of hardcore in a super basic nutshell. And then metalcore is just kind of the era that emerged when people were listening to a bunch of metal and trying to incorporate that into being in hardcore bands, and they kind of fused into this little subgenre thing.
Basically, somebody just had to label it.
Oh man, everybody's got to label everything.
We're gonna put this all together and call it this instead of just music.
Yeah.
Or rock.
Right. Rock, exactly.
I mean, it's funny. I love rock. Rock, I feel like is the only. Well, this could be wrong, but I feel like it's the only genre that has so many subgenres. Where it's just like, well, this is alternative, and this is metal, and this is metalcore, and this is this, and this is emo music, and this is punk or whatever. Where it's like it's really just all kind of rock. Like you don't do that with some other stuff. Like pop music is pop music, even though any song could sound totally different than the rest.
Yeah, but some pop music is rock too. I think like if you think about like the Animal Kingdom or something, there's like the big categories and like the phyla and the like you know, these are mammals, these are reptiles, and
Sure.
you know, like I think if you had one of those for music, you're totally right. The branch that is rock would be gigantic.
Huge.
But that's also like where we're at in time too. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
looking back at music, like we're looking at it from the seat that we're in 2019, you know, and what music has been for our lifetimes and what's been important. But, you know, if you look at that thing across time, like, I don't know, there's probably other things that were giant in there too, you know. And
Sure.
But I think that's the good observation. It's like rock is a huge branch of that
Huge.
tree.
Huge.
Yeah.
I mean, even going back before that, we quantify it sometimes just by decade. Like, I really love 70s rock or, you know,
Yeah.
80s rock or whatever,
Yeah.
and they sound, crazy enough, like totally different.
Yeah.
Totally different.
Yeah. And dude, here's the question that I have too. Like, I wonder if we're talking about being like in a genre or in a thing, like being exposed to all the good and bad parts of it. I wonder, like, because I look at 70s rock and I'm like, oh, holy crap, like so many good, amazing, like
Totally.
incredible, groundbreaking things, like early 70s things that were so incredible. I wonder if you were a fan of music at that time or you were in a band at that time. And I wonder if you looked at, like we do now, and like look at music and be like, man, everything sucks. Like music's terrible, you know,
I'm super
because they're
jaded.
exposed to all of it, but we just get the like trickle down of like,
Sure.
we get like Pink Floyd, and that's what defines it for us. But
Right.
they were hearing all these like crappy bands that were emulating and like doing a bad job of 70s rock. You know what I mean?
That's a
I
good
wonder
point.
if they had the same thing where like music sucks now, man. It's too bad that it's not like the 60s or you know whatever.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Like mixed in with all those bands that we love and revere are so many one-hit wonders that we've probably never even heard of.
Exactly. Yeah, we're not exposed to. We don't have to deal with that. So.
Be interesting. Like, what was the percentage of like the real bands that we listen to today from back then versus just all the stuff that we don't even know about?
Because even in my lifetime, like 90s rock, you know, which is like so huge to me. Like
Same.
at the time, like I didn't feel like music in general or like even rock in general was like peaking, you know. I just felt like there's some great bands, like, and this is really cool. But I was also hating a ton of what was going on, hating the radio, you know, and like
Sure.
But I look back on it and I feel so good about 90s rock and being alive and like going to see like Stone Temple Pilots, like Rage Against the Machine shows and like all these awesome things. I wonder if like looking back at the 2010s, we're going to be like, man, we were so lucky to be there, like listening to whatever, you know, at the time. Because right now I'm just like, oh, turn it all off, you know.
Oh, totally.
And that's
totally.
how it feels in the moment. But it's like
It's all
that
so bad.
perspective of time. Yeah.
So with like regard to 90s music and the trickle down effect, do you feel like in retrospect you appreciate more of it than you did at the time, or you appreciated more of it then and you can kind of just pick out the few that you really look back on and enjoy?
Man, I think it's hard to decide, or I mean, it's hard to, I guess, recognize which ones would be that awesome to me if I hadn't lived through it and been there with them and like loved them and been 15, you know?
Totally.
Because that's such an important part of like your experience of the music is like where you're at.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Because like stuff that I hear, even not even like age to age, but like mood to mood and like setting to setting. Like if I listen to something and I'm in a mood, like really like my ears are open, I'm ready to hear something cool, and I like take a moment, I put headphones on, you know, and like it's a good experience. I'm like walking or something, you know, like I'm much more apt to like be taken somewhere by some music, you know what I mean? So it's like I think where you're at is a big part of experiencing anything, like a movie, or you know, you can watch a movie a year apart and it's like a totally different experience. So
Absolutely.
Being, I think, the ages I was in the 90s, you know, basically a teenager, that I was just really ripe for a lot of that kind of experience with music, you know, like especially seeing shows and going to concerts and stuff for the first time. Like live music was like seemed pretty powerful at that time, whereas now it's like you could not drag me to a show. So
Do you remember the first show you went to?
well, it depends what you mean, because like I remember the first like show I went to that felt like a punk rock show, like a hardcore show.
What was that?
It was so it was in, I drove to Milwaukee. I lived in Madison at the time, so I drove in like 80 miles away to a bigger city and went to this place called The Rave, which still exists, the Eagles Ballroom. But it wasn't in the Eagles Ballroom, it was in the side thing called the Rave Bar. So it was like a maybe 200, 300 cap room. And the bands that were playing was Earth Crisis, Hatebreed, Scarhead, and one other band opening that I can't think of right now. But they were all on like Victory Records, like definitely of an era, like 90s metal hardcore bands. So maybe it was Madball was the other band.
I remember Hatebreed. I haven't heard of the other ones.
Yeah.
Same kind of thing. Huh?
It's a pretty specific like genre and time.
Sure.
But, anyone that's was into hardcore at the time would have known those bands for sure.
I love talking 90s music. We talk it every now and then.
Dude, totally. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. I love it.
It's just the
We have
best.
a shared appreciation.
Totally. My wife is a huge 90s alternative fan as well.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
And we talk about like kind of what you're talking about when you look at music, both when you experience it at different times in your life. Like in the 90s, when I first heard like 70s rock, I was like, oh, this is cool. But like 10 years later, it meant way more to me. And now I look back on it with
Agreed.
probably a different feeling than I did 20 years ago. But you start to realize like what's timeless and what isn't. And that's probably subjective to everybody.
Yeah.
But we look back, we lived in the 90s and we loved it at the time. 10 years later, still loved it. 20 years later, still loved it. And I remember when I was in the 90s, I hated 80s music, but I started to appreciate it as I got older. And I appreciate 70s music, 60s music, etc. But what we were talking about is like, for me, and she was in agreement, is sort of the 2002 to like 2009, 2010, when we listened to almost anything from then. So far, I'm not feeling like the timelessness, whereas it kind of picked up in the last 5 years or so. It started to pick up again, where it's like, oh, okay, like these, I feel like I could put it in now, and I can put it in a year later and be like, oh yeah, I freaking love this album. Whereas there's bands from 2005 that were huge then, and I listened to them just like, this is such shit.
Yeah.
But in 10 years, who knows? It might feel differently.
Yeah, it's hard to say if that is your experience or like is the era too.
Sure.
Like, and also like I think there's a bunch of stuff happening in that time that I'm totally like checked out on, like EDM, electronic music. It's like people that are into that now are like, there was a bunch of groundbreaking stuff happening there, I think, you know what I mean? And that just doesn't matter to me at all.
Sure.
So
Sure.
I think some
Same.
people like that are in that world would be like, dude, 2005 was like
Amazing.
was the peak. Dude.
So good.
Skrillex.
Yeah, Skrillex,
Yeah.
totally.
So yeah, I totally feel you. Do you know that so yesterday, not today, but 20 years ago, yesterday, the first single from the Fragile, Nine Inch Nails, the Fragile came out.
Really?
The day the whole world went away, or the day the whole world went away.
20 years ago?
20 years ago, yeah, 99.
It feels longer.
Does it? It feels
For
longer,
me,
but
it
it also
feels longer.
feels like not that long.
That's true. That's true. Well, I guess when I think of the music itself, it doesn't feel that long. But when you say 1999, I'm like, I feel like it was older than that. 1999. I don't know. I'm at that weird stage where like the year 2000 seems like it was 5 years ago, but like 2010 feels like it was 20 years ago.
Totally.
Somehow,
this is like the old guy podcast where we talk about our perspective on the passage of time.
Totally. I need to interview some like 15-year-old and be like, what do you think of music? And they're going to be like, oh man, Alice in Chains, classic rock, that stuff's amazing.
Totally,
And be
totally.
like,
I
"You
love that.
shut
I
your
love that
mouth."
90s rock is on classic rock stations now. Like Metallica's on classic rock
Totally.
stations. And
Yeah, all of it. I mean, all the stuff that we listened to, I heard on, like, classic rock. I heard a Foo Fighters song not too long ago on classic rock.
Dang.
And I was like, you're kidding. You are kidding. Big Me is now classic rock. You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah. Hey, it happens quick, man. It happens quick. When you think about like 80s music, or like, I was born in 1980, and like, I imagine like that first decade, like what music looked like, or like what my parents were listening to then, and like everything from like even like mid and late 70s seems like so long ago compared to that.
Totally.
But like, if you talk about 5-6 years ago from now, like it's like no time has passed. You know, like 2014, 2013, like it's the same as now. You know, it's not a different decade. You know, it's like nothing has changed in music since then. But like it seems like such a vast change from like 75 to 85 or whatever.
I think you're right, and I think that's what my wife and I were talking about this. I feel like that's for two reasons, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. We think it's for two reasons. One is because when we were younger, it really was like every decade was a very different version of rock. Or any type of music, but rock specifically, like 80s was its own thing, and then 90s, what we think of as 90s rock, you compare the two and they're vastly different. And then 80s to 70s, like you think of the classic 70s bands versus your 80s hair metal, and it's like totally different versions of rock, even though they're not that far apart. And so for one reason that I feel like we think of things in terms of age or classic or anything like that is, one, because like we quantify it in units of decades, basically, and two, it's also relative to our age. Like when I'm 10 or when I'm 12 and I'm listening to Pearl Jam, I only know what 12 years looks like. I don't know what 20 years ago is. So 25 years ago when you're 12 is ancient history. But then like 20 years from now, like in the 90s, you look back on like Pink Floyd The Wall and you're like, that was 20 years ago. This rock album is ancient. And now 20 years from now, you look back on like any Pearl Jam CD and you're like, that was 25 years ago? You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
Like it's longer now from the first Pearl Jam album than when I first heard that, comparing to like 70s music. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
like, that
Totally.
is bizarre to think of.
Yeah. Relative time. Like,
relative time. Exactly.
In comparison to like how much time you've experienced.
Totally.
That's like a super good point.
Totally. Like relative time. That's exactly it. Which is very interesting. Who are your like who are the bands that you love from the 90s? Like who stands out to you?
I mean, we talked about Nine Inch Nails. That's a big one.
Totally.
Like, you brought up like kind of Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains. Like all that was great. Soundgarden was a really big one for me. Did I say Radiohead? Radiohead was super huge for me.
Nice.
But there's a ton, man. I mean, I was listening to hip hop too then, you know. So like, there's a bunch of stuff in there like Wu-Tang that's like still resonates for me. I mean, I know we were talking rock, and I'm branching off to a different branch.
That's fine.
Of the
Whatever
tree,
branches
like,
are fine.
There weren't any distinctions about like what I thought I liked at the time.
Sure.
You know what I mean? You just like whatever comes across your plate, and it's
Totally.
So yeah, that's a handful. I mean, I was into metal too. Like so, like Metallica was like really instrumental in me getting into heavy music and like starting to play guitar even, because I think getting into heavy music like kind of predated getting into grunge for me. So like, or maybe they were really close to the same amount of time, because it would have been like 1990 basically, and I would have been just getting into like Metallica and Sepultura and Megadeth, and then shortly after that, like kind of focusing more on alternative rock and grunge and Nirvana. And like I have this awesome relic. Like I went to my parents' house and just recently like threw away a bunch of stuff and like had all my CDs there, you know, because we don't need those anymore. So I got rid of all those. But in the box with them was like some cassettes and like some keepsakes, and like I kept some demos from my old bands, and I kept this tape that my next door neighbor gave me. And my next door neighbor was like one of the first people I knew that played electric guitar. And he was this like pretty hair metal dude, and like had super long hair when he was young, and was kind of like a badass and like skateboarding around town and like getting in trouble all the time and stuff. And he made me a tape like where he was he dubbed on one side Megadeth, Rust in Peace, and he like drew the logo on there and stuff in pen, and then on the other side it was Nirvana, Nevermind. And so like that tape was just like,
Do you wear that thing out?
Yeah, I think I did. It's funny. Me and my one of my best friends, we have an expression for that, because you used to be able to wear out tapes, right?
Totally.
Like because they're magnetic, and after a certain amount of time, like they're already aging. Like age will wear them out, but also just like use, especially if you're using them in a crappy boombox or whatever, like Walkman, which you probably were using them in.
100%.
Like they just like die after a certain number of plays. And the first thing I can remember wearing out was a tape was a tape that had the Beach Boys Kokomo on it. And so we actually called that Kokomoing something if you wear it out all the way out on a cassette tape.
That's
if you Kokomo
awesome.
it, it's a good verb.
That's awesome. I like that.
So yeah, I Kokomo'd the Rust in Peace, and Nevermind tape.
How many times did you have to stick a number 2 pencil in it and rewind it because you We pulled all the ribbon out.
Yeah, or like take apart you take the front off the tape player and be like, oh shit, the tape's all wrapped around this thing now. It's kind of wrinkled at that one spot.
It's like surgery. You're having to like get in there all delicately and pull it. Yeah, and then there's always that crimped part where the song comes and you're like singing along. You're like, yeah,
it's
this
a
is
little
about
too
to
fast for a second. Yeah.
Yep. It's heartbreaking.
You're talking about just like normal tapes.
Straight up
Cassette tapes, yeah.
tapes.
Do you remember
Yeah.
having to? I used to rewind it. I used to pull it out because I wasn't able to rewind it. My tape player was super ghetto, so when I'd rewind it, it was too fast. So I would like bust out like a number 2 pencil and I'd put it in there and I would like twist it real quick and be like, all right, let's try to find this. Put it in, try to find it. Yeah. Okay. Just making sure everybody else did
totally,
that. Yeah.
Totally.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Dude, at that same time when I was at my parents' house, clearing out the tapes and stuff, I had a box of like tapes that my high school band made, and I just I gave a couple of them to my kids and like made it so they could record on a little hand recorder that was just in there with them. I was like, here's some stuff, play with the stuff, right? And they were like fascinated with the tapes and the recorder and like taking the tapes apart, and pulling the tape out, and like it was awesome. It was awesome to see because it was just like such a foreign thing to them. You know what I mean? Just like destroying tapes. But my one of my sons was just like really liked recording and just like playing his voice back, and I'm like,
That's cool.
You can definitely do that with a phone, but there's something about like having the little physical device there, like
Not the same.
yeah, exactly. It's more having buttons that like. I don't know, something more real about it being tangibly.
It's like
right
more
there.
mechanical.
Yeah,
You kind of
totally.
appreciate that it's more mechanical.
Yeah, I think that's what he liked about it. It's like he felt the button push in and click and like saw the thing move inside it when he did that, So there aren't so many things in his world like that. So
That's good.
we can talk about that if we want to continue the old guy podcast theme that we're having right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's all just nostalgia. That's all it is.
Dude, let's do it.
And it's the same thing about like I had the Walkman and I always used it when I mow the lawn or whatever, and it was always that game of like listening to the radio with the tape in, and you're like trying to time. Hopefully the DJ stops talking early enough in the intro that I can hit this. So you're trying to find like when he stops talking, but before the song starts, you hit the record button, and then like you go through the song and you have
Like
to like
capturing
time.
songs off the radio.
Yeah. Totally to build your mix.
I'm sorry. I was going to say stuffing a piece of paper. I would always stuff a piece of paper in like an old cassette because you couldn't record over those ones that you would purchase.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you have
So
to
you'd
put
have
a
to,
piece
like-
of tape or just cover the top.
Cover the top.
Little lips. Yeah, there's
And then
two
you
little
can
tabs
remember
that
that.
pop out.
Yeah, and that's your mixtape, dude.
Yep.
Every time.
Yep.
I remember
That's so
staying
funny.
up, like I was at my grandma's house for Christmas, and they lived, a different state. I remember staying up till, probably not even late, but it seemed like staying up all night to record like a Pearl Jam live concert on some radio broadcast.
Nice.
I knew you'd appreciate that.
Love Pearl Jam. Yeah, man, I love grunge. I definitely like.
What about you? Are there '90s bands that you think of as like instrumental to you that I didn't mention before? Like how would you flesh that list out for you?
Definitely like a lot of the grunge. I mean, there's the five that everybody thinks of with Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains, Nirvana. Nirvana not so much for me. Growing up it never clicked for me. And I think only recently, and when I say recently, I mean like the past year or two, have I started to kind of give it like an objective chance and like listen to it, and I'm just like, okay, this is better than I remember it.
That's
and I don't
surprising
have
to me.
such strong opinions. I think in retrospect, what it was is I was not behind the Kurt Cobain hype, and I was sort of like resentful that like he was the guy and everybody thought of him as this like god. Because to me, I was just like he's in there as like one of the good ones, but like you guys revere him as this god. And to me, like, this might upset some people, but like the fact that it's kind of like Jim Morrison, the fact that he died like at the height of his peak really immortalized him, which to me was like I felt like I was the only one that saw that for what it was. I was just like, I mean, it's a shitty thing that happened, but like now all of you that like are arguing against me that he's this great guy, I'm never going to live this down because like he tragically died at the peak of his whatever and what a rock god and blah, 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 blah. Whereas anybody else who's attained that status and lived like 20 years later, you see them and you're like, oh, I remember when they made music and yeah, they were pretty, you know what I mean? Where it's just like,
I don't think you're too far off on that, but I think it maybe even is worse. Like looking back on it, that distinction of like Cobain like standing alone from the pack, you know,
Totally.
where it's, and like him being kind of the face of that whole era and all the things that were surrounding it. Like, I think that's totally exaggerated more and more as time goes on, because it wasn't like, it didn't seem like Nirvana stood atop all those bands, you know what I mean? It was just part of that, you know, like, and it's just one of the ones that like is most iconic, maybe partially because of his death and the conversation around it. But
Totally.
like, I think I agree. I loved Nirvana, but I didn't think of them as the band, you know?
Again, I'm glad I'm not the only one, because for me, like, it was okay, but like I didn't get the hype, especially like everybody be like, Nirvana's so good, and I'm just like, have you heard Soundgarden? Like, have you heard Soundgarden? Because they're amazing.
Yep.
And Pearl Jam and Stone Temple Pilots. My wife, her favorite band is Alice in Chains.
Dude, Soundgarden doesn't get the credit that Nirvana gets because they are good at their instruments.
Totally.
Nirvana gets the credit because they're
Totally.
more punk and it's sloppier and uglier. Whereas Soundgarden, like, their singer was amazing. Everyone that played their instruments was virtuosic almost. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, that guitarist was one of the reasons that I started tuning my guitar down.
No
just
kidding.
to try and like figure out Soundgarden stuff, and it was just so cool to play in alternate tunings. And he was the first one that I like realized was doing that.
Totally. That's a good point. Yeah. That's interesting that you started taking something from that and
Heck yeah.
using it. That's great. Yeah, I mean, nobody sings like Chris Cornell, man. That's for sure.
That's for damn sure.
But it's an interesting, like, kind of lump of those main bands with Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains, and Pearl Jam. You and I have talked a lot about Pearl Jam and Eddie
For
Vedder
sure.
and like just the history of all their albums, and man, just like they are legendary, legendary to me. I mean, all those bands are. Do you guys do any covers at all when you guys perform?
Not usually. I think we've recorded a couple covers. We did a Pink Floyd cover
Oh, nice,
for a video game soundtrack.
cool.
The video game was called Homefront. It was pretty crappy. No one liked it. But a bunch of like bands in our kind of genre did covers, and we did Us and Them from one of Pink Floyd's records. So
That's cool. Are there any bands that you look back on now? I think I've asked you this before, but any bands from then that you look back on now and you think like
from when?
from like the 90s?
Okay.
Or before, really anytime.
Sure.
Anytime. And you just think like, I remember when I was young, I did not appreciate this band, but now like, man, I totally get it. And I kind of missed the boat on this, but goddamn, they're good.
Tons, man. And less from the 90s because I was more dialed in then. But like 80s for sure, I kind of had a similar experience to you where it's like it was annoying at the time. And like it wasn't until I was like maybe moving into the 2000s that I started to like realize how much good stuff was in there. And with the exception of metal, because I really liked like a bunch of stuff metal-wise from the 80s already. But just like kind of other like more popular things, I guess, from the 80s. And same like Pink Floyd's a great example to Beatles, like any of these that like I was exposed to early on but didn't land for me until later. Like I think Pink Floyd and the Beatles are probably two of the top ones that I've done a deep dive into.
Nice.
Way later on. Like way later than I should have, you know.
Just kind of hit you at a certain time where you're just like, okay, I get it now.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. And it definitely happens to me. I mean, especially as I sort of realize that I don't appreciate a ton of new music, and so I kind of have to go back to appreciate music. And as I kind of broaden it's almost like reliving the 90s or the 80s where it's like I'm giving more things a chance instead of just saying, I remember I love this, I'm going to listen to this album. I kind of go back and I'm like, I remember they were really popular. Why was I not so into them?
Yeah,
and then I hear it and I'm like, oh, shit.
Go back to
They're
what you missed rather than what you didn't
Yes,
miss. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like lately, the past year especially, I've gotten really into Rage Against the Machine, which
Nice.
I was not into at the time, but later on I started to like appreciate more and more. And now I'm just like, God damn,
So great.
so good. And talk about the good instrumentals, man. Holy crap, that's like one of the tightest bands I've ever heard, just instrumentally for me.
I think about their catalog too, as just because it's short, right? It's just 3 records. Like they broke up before they had a chance to start putting out stuff that wasn't rock solid, you know. And those 3 records are just like perfect, you know. Like there's there's no fat in their career to cut.
Totally.
So it's a rarity. Like most often, like bands will last a little longer and start to, there'll be a little more filler every time, but they're like rock solid.
You're totally right. That's a good point. They kind of never got to the point where it started to fall apart.
Yeah.
It's kind of the perfect place to be.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that you love Soundgarden and you love Rage Against the Machine, but you're not on board with Audioslave as much.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's so crazy to me.
Yeah, I don't know. It could be that same thing we've been talking about, like where I was at with it. But
Sure.
like, for some reason the things I like about Chris Cornell's voice like aren't working for me in that context. You know what I mean? Like
Sure.
it seems like I'm listening to two different things and I like two different things about it, but they're like not working together.
Fair
Because
enough.
it's like cool riffs and great vocals and great grooves that Rage would have had, but like for some reason it's just like, I don't know, the contrast is like not suiting me.
It's like that. Like the parts are actually greater than the sum that it creates.
Yeah, totally.
Interesting.
You dig that band though?
I love Audioslave.
Okay, all right.
I love Audioslave, but it's okay. You cannot.
Yeah, and maybe I'll check it back out and see if I missed that one, and it was an error on my part.
It could be. Now you got to wait like another 10 years so you can go back 20 years
I
and
can do that.
appreciate it.
I can do that.
Speaking of 9 Inch Nails, I think 9 Inch Nails is interesting for the people that don't sort of pay attention to it or they see it superficially, because I think one of my favorite things about Trent Reznor is how incredibly influential he is without anybody having any idea. Like the amount of albums he works on with people and for people and the writing he does and soundtracks that he does and stuff that he does kind of behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like people don't know that, which is crazy to me. But he's done a lot. He's like one of the most accomplished people I've seen.
Yeah, tons of things. Tons and tons of things. And he's in some way involved with Apple Music too.
Yeah.
Like with programming or with their setup. So I'm not really exactly sure what his job is there. But
Same, but I knew he was doing something.
Yeah.
It's interesting. He's an interesting dude.
For sure.
But
I was pretty obsessed with 9 Inch Nails for a long time there.
Are you?
Yeah.
Which albums?
Downward Spiral and The Fragile.
Okay.
Mainly. Are the main ones. But
Sure.
I love Pretty Hate Machine. I didn't love it at the time. When I first heard it, I was like, I could take it or leave it. But then by the time the Downward Spiral came out, I went back to it and broke in the little EP before it and stuff, and they're so great.
That's awesome.
Probably the best concert I've ever been to in my life.
No kidding.
9 Inch Nails.
Where was that?
It was in Madison at a Coliseum, Dane County Coliseum.
Nice.
It was with Perfect Circle opening, and it was on the tour for The Fragile.
Huh. So that was, what years was that?
It's probably 2000.
2000?
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. Shit.
Man, that
Sure.
seems late. It could have been before that. Maybe it wasn't. The Fragile wasn't quite out yet, but it was somewhere around there.
Interesting.
In the 90s.
Cool. Perfect Circle, another good one. I think we disagree on their newest album.
Do we? Because you're not down?
I don't like it at all.
I haven't spent much time with it since that conversation we had about
Okay.
it.
Good.
I was liking it
Good.
at the time, but it's not in heavy rotation.
And then I just
for me.
shit on your parade. And I was just like, Ryan, it's not good.
That's cool, man. I don't need the support. I can like things. I actually kind of enjoy it when I like something that no one else likes.
Sure.
You know what I mean? There's some sort of weird pleasure in finding something that's a little weird, a little out there, and you don't expect people to like it. Because a lot of times I'll like something and I'll be like, everyone has to hear this, or everyone has to see this movie, or whatever the thing is that I'm into. Everyone should do jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is amazing.
Right.
But there's things that I get into and I'm like, man, no one's gonna like this, but I like it, and that makes it more intimate in a way. There's stuff that's really abrasive about it or really far left, and I expect no one to like it, but those things are kind of fun when you can find
As long as you dig it.
Yeah.
That's kind of all that matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's important, is to have kind of your own opinions about music. I mean, what really connects to you is the most important.
Yeah.
Right. And it's funny that you say that, because I feel like that's almost like our culture nowadays, where it's people I know that are super into music almost resent it if you also like it.
Because it's less cool.
Yeah. I found this band that nobody's heard of. I have this album that no one's heard of, and I love it. Like, what do you think? Oh, I dig it. I'm going to download it. Oh, don't do that. No, this is like my find.
Yeah,
This is-
exactly. Yeah, maybe that's my.
I don't want them to be mainstream.
My inner cool guy is like what likes those kind of things.
This is I found this. This
Yeah.
is my thing. Well, tell me about your band. When did you guys start? Where'd you come from?
So the band Misery Signals started in about 2002, and it kind of came out of the remnants of my previous band. I started this band. Well, I shouldn't say I started it. There was a group of people that started a band with me in college, essentially, and it's called Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, and it was just me and some friends from kind of the Milwaukee area hardcore scene, and we started that band and just played as many shows as we could, started touring a little bit, and when that kind of fell apart, we started Misery Signals from a few of the people in that band, and kicked it off and kept trying to tour and put out music and play shows and do that kind of thing.
Nice. How many albums do you have now?
We have 4 full lengths. I mean, we put out kind of an EP demo kind of thing to start. That's pretty crappy, and then we made four full albums. The first 3 were on a record label, and then the 4th one we put out ourselves.
Nice. How was it different putting it out yourself versus on a record label? Was that an enjoyable experience?
Oh yeah, definitely, totally. Yeah, record labels are super cool. Our experience with the record label we were on is called Ferret Music, and it was like at the time we joined, it was 2 guys. You know, it was like a pretty small operation, like pretty underground, pretty punk. And the guys were really cool and really fair to us and really nice, and like helped us a lot, helped us become a band that people would hear about. You know what I mean? They're promoting us and doing a lot of stuff. But through the time that our band was on their label, and soon after our 3rd release with them, they had kind of grown as a company, and they had made a deal with Warner Brothers to get their albums distributed further, and to expand their reach, essentially. And somewhere in there, it didn't go well between them and Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers assumed control of the whole thing and fired the dude that we liked, knew, and were friends with, and had got us set up. And after that, it became like a pretty undesirable situation for us, because it's Warner Brothers. It's like it's a giant thing, right? We don't really have time, or we didn't even really have communication with them at that point. And there was a bunch of things that we wanted to do. Like, I was working on a side project at the time, and they said we couldn't put it out because it violates the contract we have with them. They weren't going to be supportive of us doing the next record, and it ended up being this big pain. So our experience early on with the record was really, really good, and was super helpful, and ended up in this thing that was pretty bad and pretty ugly. And so when we moved on from that and then put out a record on our own, it was cool because it was like kind of the crowdfunding boom was kicking off, and we did like this is like 2013, so we did a crowdfunding campaign, and it was like super successful. It was like it felt great. Like, we felt really supported, and like we could make any of the decisions we wanted to make without consulting anybody, you know. So
That's awesome.
So it's just like the money was there direct from the fans. So it was a pretty profound experience, actually. Like, to be just directly making something for people and not going through any avenues of like marketing or ideas about how it should be, or you know, where it could be taken or what it could be packaged with, or whatever that a record label does, which helps bands grow. Like, I'm not faulting them for that. It's just like they have different motivations, you know. So it's a little murkier, and it's not just about like these songs rock and we like to make them and we want you to have them, you know. So something really cool about that model, and we actually like kind of made money for the first time, like putting out an album, which is cool.
That's cool.
Yeah, so it's been great. We'll yeah, and I think times again are changing with a lot of things like this, where it's like you don't need that sort of business support to be creating and putting music out. Like, it's cheaper than ever to create a record.
Wow.
And you know, you don't need this whole huge fiasco to do it.
Sure.
So yeah, it's a weird climate the music industry is in, I think.
And is the marketing kind of more in your hands now with like, I mean, I think specifically of like social media and kind of the digital age, is you can reach a lot of people without having to go to a marketing guru and say, hey, I don't know how to tell people I made this album. How do you tell people I made this album? Or now
how do you get people to follow your social media too? You know?
Right.
It's a different challenge. It's kind of the same challenge, just in a different package.
Sure.
But I've historically, personally, been super bad at the social media stuff with the band, and honestly, only in the last year have I realized, I can hire somebody to do that for me. Without being on a record.
Somebody who's good at it, somebody who knows what they're doing, somebody who can use the
tool.
And
it's just our friend too. Like, it's just a guy that's been our roadie for a long time, knows the band, has like, so it's not like, hey, paying some marketing company to hype up the band. It's like, it's still the things we like about social media, which is like, it's a more intimate look and like a closer connection. And we still, I still have access to all those accounts and everything, but for the most part, the person posting it is our roadie, and he's been involved with the band for the whole time, and he does have inside looks, and he does have like fun stories and quirky things about the band that you want to hear. Like, that social media takes you closer to something that you like, you know. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's been a great fix for me, because I just like don't want to deal with it. And yeah. So, but I think it's tough for bands. Like, that's one of the main things that people ask me, like, because I work with some younger bands, like I do recording and producing for people. So I'll work with younger artists or newer artists, and they're like, what do we do to like get people to hear the record?
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know.
How do we tell people, here's our music, listen to it?
I don't know. My plan when I did it, like, because people, I guess, care about my band somewhat now, and it's in this some small genre. But like at the time when I was trying to make people care about my band, it didn't have anything to do with YouTube or social media or anything like that. It just was go play as many shows in as many places as you can.
Just get legitimate exposure.
Yeah, and just move your actual ass to a different place and perform.
Did you have like a little table set up with like T-shirts and albums for people to, or you just like push it out, buy this, buy this, buy this?
Yeah, you got it. Well, I mean, not on the street, at the shows.
Right,
like,
at the show.
Yeah, I'm not walking around like just cold calling
just
strangers.
Downtown Madison.
Yeah,
there you
exactly. Go. So, but yeah, you always got like merchandise is like one of the only ways the band survived early on.
Really?
It's like you have to like sell something, and it's kind of unfortunate that there's so many like business things intertwined with it. It'd be awesome to be able to just like make art and have it sustain itself in some way.
That's the dream.
But there's always that aspect of like making it something you can survive on.
Yeah, you do actually have to pay for things.
Yeah, you have to actually get to the next show, put gas in the tank, and not starve to death on the way.
Have like food in between.
Yeah, if you're lucky.
If you're lucky. The whole starving artist thing is true. Well, whoever does your Facebook stuff must be doing a pretty good job. You guys are just shy of 100,000 followers. So.
Oh man, we're under 100,000 now.
You're
over for a while.
You're 97 something.
Oh dang.
At least last I checked.
It's slipping.
Nonetheless, it's cool to see, because sometimes I feel like, I don't know. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not super in touch with the Boise music scene, but I swear to God, everybody I know is in a band. And it's like, it's one thing to hear people say that. It's another thing when like you say you're in a band, and then I go on your Facebook and you have 100,000 followers, and like you guys just did this European tour, and it's like, well, this is a little different than like, me and my buddies played like a couple shows. It was really cool.
It is, but it isn't. You know what I mean? It's just a matter of kind of like perspective. We're not really truly doing anything different. We've just been fortunate enough to have been in a place where people gave a shit to an extent at some time, and it's allowed us to do a bunch of cool things. So, I mean, the optics are different, like it appears different, and like I do take, some satisfaction in the fact that I've been able to travel and do it and like sell some records and like pretty much not have a job for a decade in the middle there where I was just touring, and that's all amazing, and I'm super grateful for it, but like I don't think that it's a totally different thing. It's just like a little, because I don't know, it's more similar than you think. I know exactly what you're saying.
Sure.
I think everyone, like having a band, we could have a band right now. Like I could say, do you want to do a band? And you could be like,
Yep.
okay, cool. What are you gonna play?
We're in a band.
I'll play a keyboard. So now we have a band. You
Right.
know what I mean? Like,
Right.
so there's definitely like a scale of like how much you have a band and how much work you've put into it and how much has happened there. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. Maybe you're right at that sweet spot where you're popular enough where somebody's going to hear you and turn to their friend and be like, I heard this band that you've never heard of before, and their friend's going to be like, I want to
Yes,
listen to that, and they're going to be
totally.
like, no, I discovered this band.
I think we totally are, man. Like we've even in like our kind of like metalcore genre, like I think there's like we've always been in that operating in a place where it's like we're not the biggest band on the festival, or we're not like the most hype band at any given moment, but it's like we've always had some fans or some kind of like interest there, you know what
Sure.
I mean? So it's like we've remained small enough to still be cool.
Tell me about your most recent tour.
Oh, okay. So most recently we went to Europe, and this is the first time we had been there in about 10 years. So it was really cool to get back, and the people that brought us out, like the booking company, did an awesome job, and they were the same people. It's called Avocado Booking. It's the same people that took us over there a decade ago, and they've just grown a lot and gotten really streamlined with what they do. And like, I think people really appreciate live music over there and like are fired up about it, because the shows went really well, and like they just take really good care of you when you go over there. So like we were really well handled
Nice.
and fed and, you know, received in general. Also, it's important to note too that we went, when you go to Europe, like, you know, we can't drive anywhere. We don't know what we're doing. We have to like have someone drive us. When we tour in the U.S. or whatever, we just go in a van, our own
Right.
van and trailer. But over there, it's like you're hiring a driver anyways, and they have giant double-decker buses. Like we can't afford a tour bus here because we're just not big enough of a band. But over there, the buses are such that they're double-decker. Up top, there's a whole ton of bunks, and we can split it with other bands. So we actually took all 4 bands that were touring together and hired one giant bus.
That's awesome.
So we could afford it, because we could afford a quarter of it.
Uh-huh.
And so we were rolling on this big tour bus, and it just was like pretty good lifestyle every day, because we'd just wake up and the driver had already taken us there. We'd sleep as long as you want in the bunk, go into the venues. A lot of the venues are kind of big complexes too, with like showers and like nice kind of like backstage rooms, and there's food laid out and stuff. And
Nice.
Tim cuts me some nice strawberries, so I'm ready.
The vertical cut.
Yeah, no, horizontal.
Or horizontal cut, my bad.
Yeah, on ice.
God damn it.
Yeah, but it was really good. It was really good tour. You know, like 13, 14 shows.
Where'd you go?
There's a lot in Germany. Went to London. We went to Austria and Netherlands, and we went as far east as Budapest,
Wow.
which I'd never been to. And Budapest was really cool.
That's amazing.
Went to the sweet old like bathhouse thing that's in this like giant, like, I don't know, like it seems like an old marble like museum-esque ancient building, and there's all these rooms. You go to these different hot baths and like massages and crazy things. So that was a super cool day in
That's
Budapest.
amazing.
Yeah.
It probably is like super ancient.
Yeah, everything over there is so much older. Like just walking around, you just feel, just even the buildings, like you just feel so much more history. Like Prague's one of the coolest cities we went to too. Just like walking around Prague's amazing.
Nice, just architecture and history and all
Yeah,
that
it's
stuff.
just, you just feel it, and I don't know. It's like people are on foot, and it's just like a vibrant place, you know.
Interesting. Huh. I'm gonna put you on the spot.
Okay.
Every rock star at every show ever always says,
Okay.
like, this city's amazing. This is our favorite show we've ever done. You guys are way better than the last place we went, which is bullshit. But
Yeah, no, they can't all be the best.
what's your favorite show that you've done? Where's your favorite place that you've been? Either the city or the crowd, or just when you said this is the best ever, you legitimately meant like this is the best show ever.
Okay, I think I can answer that. Because for us, like we've always shared members with a couple Canadians, and so early in the band we spent time in Western Canada, so like Alberta, Calgary, and Calgary and Edmonton specifically, and everything kind of through the middle of the country in the prairies there too.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this big stretch from Edmonton over to like Saskatoon, Regina, like middle of Canada, which you guys probably maybe even have not heard
Sure.
of, and not a lot of bands go to, but we were traveling back and forth from there in Wisconsin and playing shows in these places and kind of built up this audience there. So even now when we go back and play in like Alberta, like it's awesome. Like we're super well received, and like we have this really organic fan base there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it comes from that time we spent there when it's largely ignored by a lot of tours just because of the sheer distance you have to travel to get there, through a lot of nothing. So like to get to Edmonton, you have to go to the top of our state and drive 10 more hours north. You know,
Right.
like, so it's a haul. It's pretty far up there. It's pretty bitterly cold and, like desolate. I mean, it's an awesome city once you get there, but there's some travel involved.
Not the best drive, maybe.
It actually kind of is. I mean, if you're coming that way, like through from the tip of Idaho, like it's an amazing drive because you're in like just the Rockies on steroids. You're going through like eastern British Columbia, and like that's where the mountains are the biggest and the most beautiful in this continent. So like that's an amazing drive through there, but it's not easy. You can take the easy drive. You can go over farther east and go from like Montana and go up that way, and then you'll see nothing.
Right, just a flat highway. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
but yeah. So that's going to be my answer. Is going to be Western Canada.
Fair enough. Nice. Well, Western Canada, they meant it when they said it. That's good to know.
Those were the times we weren't lying. But also, you get caught up in the. I mean, I don't think we like cheesily run the crowd too often. You know what I mean? Like Spinal Tap style.
Like, you guys are the best crowd because we're really excited right now. When the show's over and some of that adrenaline wears off.
That might be authentic in a lot of those moments.
Right, in the moment. Yeah. It's like when you're super drunk and you're telling everybody that like you love them. You're my best friend. Yes.
I love you so much.
They sober up and you're like, maybe not.
Yeah, I think that's what's going on there. It's like lead singers are fired up. They're having a great time. They're loving your energy.
Which is good, right?
Yeah.
That's what you want.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked a lot about musical influences from back in the day. Who are you listening to now? Man,
that's a bad question for me right now because I'm just like not doing my diligence and like seeking out music right now. So I'm mostly listening to stuff I would have already been listening to.
Okay.
For a lot of time, but listen to a lot of podcasts.
I know
that's not music, but
nice.
I love like podcasts and audiobook though. Like it's like it takes up a ton of my listening time.
What were you listening to on the way here?
I was listening to a podcast called On Being, which is like a real like grown up like NPR-ish podcast. I know I might not be on NPR, but
what's it about?
It's basically about just like it takes like spiritual teachers and like it's a lot about like spirituality in the modern world, which is like but it's about wisdom really.
Okay.
It's like because it'll have like poets on there and writers on there and but a lot of like kind of religious teachers and stuff, which is like pretty outside my comfort zone for the most part, but that's why I find it interesting. And I think that they do a good job like bringing a bunch of ideas that might be otherwise unpalatable to people and kind of forcing them to see the value in them. So interesting.
That sounds like it would be valuable. Do you find yourself to be a spiritual person?
Historically, not at all. But more and more lately.
I feel like for a lot of people, me too, being spiritual and being religious are not the same.
100%.
Not the same. You can be spiritual and not religious at all. But sometimes for people, they're neither, or they're both.
Sure. And I think a lot of people our generation are like pretty allergic to that idea of like religion in general or like spirituality. And like I think I think there's a shift kind of back away from that. You know what I mean? Like I think I notice a lot of people that, you know, are just really like historically have been just like super atheist or agnostic and like vehement about that. I think they're kind of coming out on the other side of that. Unfortunately, a lot of it is annoying, and like your like yoga friends are kind of like have their Whole Foods spirituality, which can be a little bit annoying. So it's like it can be shitty from both directions. But I mean, I think there is something valid in like reaching for something in life that's deeper than you would normally go, or more meaningful than you would normally go, or like just examining more closely like what this is, you know.
Sure.
So I think there's definitely value there, and I think it's something that I had largely ignored for some of the same reasons, like, you know, being a punk rock kid and like being like pretty anti-establishment, like having like bad experiences with church and religion early on. Like I put it in everything surrounding it in the same category of just like this dumbed down like caricature of like church is control and church is the state, and you know, it's all just like this one thing that's not very punk and cool. So I kind of skewed the whole thing. So it's interesting now to be kind of an adult and not care if something is not punk or whatever, and trying to extract the things that are meaningful to me that I left in that pile that I put aside early on, you know.
Sure. I mean, I think that's what I think everybody needs to sort of analyze that exactly, as just what's meaningful to you. Like it can be something way different than me, even if it's religion or whatever. That's great. But there's many ways to find meaning that don't come from that.
Yeah.
And there's many ways to find meaning that don't come from being vehemently, violently against it as well.
Right.
So you just kind of got to find what works for you, I guess. What I was listening to on the way over here was something you recommended to me, as a matter of fact.
Really?
I was listening to Baroness on the way here.
Oh, cool.
The Purple album.
Great album.
It's pretty good stuff.
Dude,
Yeah,
glad you were checking it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I dig it. I like it a lot.
They just put out a new record days ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I don't know if it's going to be as good as Purple. Time will tell, but Purple's a great record.
I was talking to Mike Getchell about Baroness, and he said that there's like a shift album to album, that they kind of grow and change with every album. So if you listen to Purple, it's not the same as the first album.
Definitely not, yeah.
And like same thing going the other direction, where every album's kind of different from the next.
That's like an art in and of itself, is like a band developing, you know what I mean? Like maintaining the things that people like them for and got them to the place that they're in, but also still growing enough that it stays interesting, you know, like so yeah, that's like something I think about a lot with bands. Rather
than like you make your first album, it's super successful, so you convince yourself that the second album has to be exactly the same.
Right. Yeah, totally. That's the sophomore slump, man. Like they make the record that breaks, and then they think they have to repeat that in some way, and they're not using the same motivations to make the record. Like, do you know the band Cave In is? Okay. They're a really good example of this, and they're also a band that I want to make you check out. But
nice.
They were a band that started like really metalcore, and one of the innovators like that got me thinking differently about melody and heavy music, and like they're like cited pretty frequently as like though they were never really big, they were like influential on a ton of the bands from my time.
No kidding.
But they made this huge shift around their third record, where they went much more space rock, and like got really like very, very wildly different. And after that record, were actually signed by a major label, and made another record that was kind of further in that departure. But they're a good case study, because they kind of like came back out the other side and started making some heavy music on the other side, and like, but the change from like the second record to the third record is like so stark,
Okay.
Like, so wild, and like it's like it's a conversation point for a lot of people, because like everyone loves that second record, like Until Your Heart Stops it's called, and then the next one's called Jupiter, and like it's pretty polarizing for people, like whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, or whether Jupiter's the beginning of the band or the end of the band, you know, like,
Right.
And that band like just has existed for a long time. Like that was, man, I'm gonna say Jupiter came out in 1997.
Damn.
But they just put out a record as well, like Caven did.
So they're still going.
Still going, yeah.
Are they still super spacey?
Yeah, they're still continue to evolve. So it's like they're still not predictable. Like the new record's like really cool. Radiohead's a good band that we could talk about that changes a lot. And,
Totally.
Stays interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like I feel like they still kind of keep the same thread. Like you know a Radiohead song when you hear it, sort of off the first riff.
Right.
Like this sounds like something Radiohead would do, but it's different enough to where there's like an evolution.
Yeah, it sounds like something they would do, but like it's not always the same sound. You know what I mean? It's like the same spirit or the same like artistic motivation or like direction, but it's like can sound radically different, you know. And like, and if you listen, especially like Kid A, and then you know, OK Computer, like those two records are like wildly different, and that's like a huge departure. A lot of people talk about like them coming from like that guitar rock bit, or even though OK Computer's like got a lot of electronics and like depth and sonics on there, like Kid A is just like sonically super different, super electronic and super like the structures are really strange.
Yeah, I have to go back and listen to that.
Oh man, do yourself a favor, do it.
Just go pick it up.
Yeah. Listen to both those records, OK Computer and Kid A, and In Rainbows too, which is 10 years later, but somehow still sounds like OK Computer, but doesn't.
You still know it's them.
We'll have another conversation like this. I don't know if anyone's going to want to hear it, but you can listen to those three records, and then we'll talk just about that for this many minutes.
Well, that's what I'm having to discipline myself to do now, and it's hard. The advent of like iTunes, where you can just go and be like, I want this song, and this song. Whereas when we were growing up, like you bought an album, and sure you could listen to the same songs you wanted to, but like you invariably would pick it up and listen to the whole thing, regardless of if you loved every song or not. And nowadays it's like I have to discipline myself to, when I want to go listen to something, whether it's modern or from back in the day, to just be like, okay, just listen to the whole album. Just download the whole thing.
Yeah.
And kind of appreciate it, or re-listen to it, or pay attention to it, instead of just like, I know I really like that song, and then you just kind of throw the rest away. Hard thing to do.
Yeah.
It usually pays off, though.
I think so, too. Yeah, you're not forced to do it anymore. You got to make that choice.
Yeah. Every now and then I'll do that, though. I'll just go through and be like, I want this one song.
Yeah, there's a time and place for like the DJ action too, like
Totally.
you know, just switching quickly from one mode to another.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sit in front of my computer and just be like, I feel like Candlebox is really unappreciated. I'll just download that song or whatever.
I only know one Candlebox song.
Everyone only knows one Candlebox song, but it's a good song, or whatever the band is. Bush is one that I did that, or I wanted to do with that. It's because I noticed I was like downloading the songs that I like, and then I'm like, oh, I forget I really like them just as a band generally. I should just actually download the albums.
Do it
instead of just the one song. What were you listening to before we got here, Tim?
I was listening to Misery Signals.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
And
in preparation,
the new Memphis May Fire album, the new Sum 41 single that was released on their new album.
Sum 41 did a thing.
I had to. My roommate didn't know who NoFX is. I grew up on punk.
Really?
Yeah, I grew up on punk, Pennywise, Black Flag.
NoFX is like a staple of punk.
Anti-Flag.
Where I was.
Yeah. And he didn't know who NoFX was, and so he started playing the new Sum 41 song for me. He's like, dude, I love Sum 41. They're such a huge influence. And I was like, you probably would like NoFX, because they sound like a NoFX that's been tweaked a little bit.
Yeah.
They're very punk influenced, and so I started playing some NoFX for him. And then I got on this NoFX kick.
Did it land for him, or did he
appreciate
it?
Loved it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, he appreciated it.
Because sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes you're like, oh, here's the band that influenced that. That's actually way better. But there's like, nah, I don't know. I wasn't there. Fuck that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's crazy. Because especially with people nowadays, and he's 26, so he's a little bit younger. I was born in 85. Started listening to punk in like 96, 97. as soon as I picked up a skateboard. So like my background is influenced completely by like punk, and then I went into hip hop, and then as soon as like the emo and the metalcore scene and everything, like you guys were talking about rock and roll, I mean it rolls up from 20 plus genres up into just rock and roll, right? Because you can break metalcore up into so many different genres, and punk into so many genres now, and you know, the post-hardcore, like it all rolls up into one genre essentially. But like but yeah, those are the bands that I've been listening to at least over the last couple of days. But I've also, I mean, really everybody I've been listening to are people that I've been taking photos for. So it's everything from funk and jazz and hip hop to like metal, and I'm all over the place, man.
That's cool. That's the way to be.
Yeah. Well, and they all influence, like, I think nowadays with social media, Spotify, everything, certain tags and the algorithm is going to roll everything up into a style. So if you listen to like certain genres, they're going to recommend certain bands that are going to match what you like or what have also been listened to by other people who are listening to the same music as you, you know, and they're going to try to get you to engage more and more and more. And that's the point. And as I think that progresses and a lot of these genres integrate, we're going to see a completely diverse style of music. I mean, think about like rappers and hip hop like stars who are jumping into country now, and they call it country, you know. And most people who listen to honky tonk and country and like bluegrass, they would look at it and be like, no, that ain't country. That's not bluegrass. Those are the hardcore people, right? But the way that I view music is now it's a cesspool of genres that are meshed together. Like last night, I had the opportunity to go and shoot Lyrics Born. Well, he's like a soul, funk, hip hop, but he also sings. And like you can't really narrow down his style because every different song or every song is completely different, but they all have the same like style, the same vibe, you know? Yeah. And the cool thing about music is anybody who can play music can pick up their instrument for the most part if they're serious about it, and they can really just jive and they enjoy it. And I have a music room over here. I've had country bands in here and like metalcore bands at the same time, and they'll just jam out and they'll have a great time, and they know how to speak to each other on an instrumental level, and they have a good time only because they have an appreciation for music itself, you know? And for me, that's why I'm like super interested in the industry, is because I get to see all these different personalities come together and enjoy music, you know, whether or not you interpret it differently or you communicate it differently, the core is still there. And so that's why I have such a diverse like playlist, is because I have an appreciation for music in general. I wish I could play a little bit better. I play some piano, and I played other instruments throughout the years. But yeah, to answer your question, those are the bands that I've been listening to. A lot of punk, a lot of metal, a lot of hip hop.
You just brought us full circle too, talking about Cameron's first question about genres, you know, and how it's kind of like painful to put stuff into genres sometimes, and like that's not what really matters about the music that you like, or you know, like even what the algorithm's giving you, you know what I mean? It's not always necessarily genre based, it's more like spirit based or sonics, or you know, whatever's interesting to you. So yeah, totally.
And shoot, what was the first platform? I don't know why I don't ever use this anymore, but it was one of the first apps that would just give you like a shuffle playlist for free. Pandora. And I think Pandora really opened up Pandora's box, right? Because when I would listen to, I would throw on Sum 41, right? And then it would play a bunch of music on Sum 41, but some of those didn't really match Sum 41. It was just based on who else is listening to Sum 41 and what else have they liked, or what else have they added to their playlist. And I think that platform really got people to explore. And then ever since like Pandora came out, I started listening to Pandora back in like 2007, I think, was when somebody told me about it, on my laptop before smartphones. And as soon as I got into that, like I'd always been really into music, but right when I, signed up on there and I had started listening to the bands that I was familiar with, and it pushed content at me that I was unfamiliar with, it really opened up the horizon. Like there were so many like bands and genres that I wasn't very familiar with, but I was like, oh man, dude, I really like this song. So then I'd listen to them, and then it reintroduced me to like another band or another type of genre that was slightly connected, same hashtags, different genre, or rolled up underneath the same like top level genre. But yeah, I think social media has played a huge role, because when you guys were talking about like the 70s and 80s, you had rap, you had rock and roll, and you had like country. That was like, growing up, that was it, man. You listened to like the rock and roll station, the rap station, or you listen to the country station, and now it breaks out into so many different genres, and jazz and blues, they're going to be a huge influence in all of those genres, and so it just really depends on what you really like. But I don't know. I'm a music fan. As you can see, I'm getting a little excited.
Yeah, the question I always wonder is, like, with all the genre interbreeding that's going on nowadays, is it going to get to the point where there's just so much diversity in music, or is it going to get to the point where there's kind of like you can only interbreed so far before that you've created one genre? You know what I mean? It's all
It's
same.
all just music.
Like, this song has some rap, some country, and some rock in it. This song has some rap, some country. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You get to the point where there's so much crossover, you've essentially created like one sort of mutated genre. You know what I mean?
I think now it's getting to the point where it's all just one pool of music, because it all bleeds into they all bleed into one another. Like again, last night, this guy had a full band on stage, and it was like certain songs were super jazzy, some were super bluesy, some were just straight up SoCal hip hop, and it was all one guy, Yeah. And for me, like, when I was there last night, I even thought about that. Last night I was like, how would I describe Lyrics Born to somebody who's never listened to him? Because I kept telling them, like, I had a couple extra free tickets and everybody was busy, and they were like, well, who is it? And I was like, it's Lyrics Born. He's like hip hop, but he's got like some jazzy, bluesy, like funk, like that everything, like anything, like. That's really like how to describe it. I guess there's always a core, you're going to have your like, oh, he's a core hip hop artist, but he's got influences from these different genres. Sure. But it is super difficult to describe it. And living with somebody who's in a metalcore band, who's like a little more soft, they have a lot of clean vocals and whatnot. And I've actually had a lot of different bands in here who are in the metalcore genre. They all sound completely different, but they all categorize themselves within the metalcore genre, and they all have their own unique styles. Some are more heavy, some are a little lighter, some have more like alternative influence, some of them have more of like grungy influence, you know what I'm saying? And I think it really just depends on who's in that band, how they learned, who they learned it from, like the styles that they gravitate towards, and then how it is that they're able to apply their skill set to kind of mesh well with those that they are within the band. Does that make sense? Yeah? Hopefully it makes sense. Yeah. So that's a tough question to answer there. I mean, totally. It's a melting pot, dude. Music's a melting pot, man. I don't think you can really... Art's art, right?
For sure.
You look at something on a wall and you're like, honestly, if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. I don't really care if it's like a contemporary art. I don't really care if it's like a mosaic style of art. Sure. If I like it, I like it. So...
Yeah, there's some that I appreciate, and like traditional art speaking, there's some that I really appreciate, and there's some that I'm just like, I don't fucking get it.
There's some metal bands out there, some hip-hop artists. I'm like, dude, I can't jive with that. But they all say, well, if we have to define who we are, this is probably the closest that we're going to be. Like, this is what the closest genre we'd probably be associated with.
Fair enough. Who do you dig outside of rock? You mentioned some hip-hop.
Oh, man. Well, yeah.
Are you going to break stuff?
Across history or now
In
or
general. Yeah, anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, hip hop's pretty big for me.
Okay.
That's probably the other foundational thing. For
You mentioned
music.
Wu-Tang.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like, there was kind of an indie rap scene that was happening in the Midwest around the time. And I would go see Atmosphere a bunch because they were in Minneapolis, and they would travel through where I lived a bunch. And so I went to a bunch of Atmosphere shows and like kind of got sucked into that world of like indie rappers and like rhyme sayers and living legends and
Yeah, man.
but I mean I was also listening to kind of like bigger hip hop artists too, like, you know, The Roots was pretty big for me.
Nice.
Like Mos Def, Talib Kweli, and like
Nice.
Even like Busta Rhymes was like pretty huge for me.
Yeah, same when I was younger, same.
So with Midwest, were you into like Apathy, Self-Titled?
I don't know what that is even.
Oh, those are Midwest rappers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
No, I don't know
yeah.
that one. I missed that.
Anyways, I was gonna say I saw them not too long ago and they killed it. So
Nice. Yeah.
I just thought maybe, Midwest. They're like Ohio guys.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Who was it Talib Kweli used to play with a lot?
Well, he was in Black Star with Mos Def,
Mhm.
and that was like
That's
it was
what I'm
like
thinking
DJ
of.
High Tech and Mos Def and Talib Kweli were like Black Star together, and then later
That's right.
Talib Kweli and High Tech were just together, and they made Reflection Eternal, which I think is
first album I ever listened to for hip hop.
Reflection Eternal.
Yeah, it's
Dang.
one of the best albums
That's
out
a
there.
monster, dude. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's
amazing.
one of the best albums out there. Yeah, we could talk a lot about like some old school, like good hip hop.
For
Yeah,
sure.
late 90s, early 2000s for sure.
And you're a super big country guy, right?
Yeah, not really. I just kind of missed it.
Brooks.
No, man. I heard the concert was a lot of fun.
It was crazy.
It was crazy. Yeah.
It was crazy.
Oh, you went to the concert?
I did. Yeah, I was
Really?
there on Friday.
Dang.
It was
nice.
it was unreal. Yeah, it was crazy.
Nice.
It's weird. Like, you ever go to those concerts? I mean, you've been to a million. I'm sure you've put on plenty of too. But like, it was a weird experience because I remember thinking that it was exactly that. Like, this isn't a concert. This is like an experience. Like, this
Yeah.
feels different than anything I've ever done before, having gone to plenty of concerts. You know,
Mhm.
like just the atmosphere and like the people and like it was just weird. A whole different vibe than I've ever experienced before. Probably because it was like for Boise, like the most sensational thing that's ever happened, and it was in the football stadium.
It's a
and
real big event. Yeah.
real big event. Yes,
2 nights at the football stadium.
2 nights.
It's
There was a
pretty good.
helicopter circling the whole time. Like it was nuts. It was cool. Outside of being a famous rock star, you also have
That's
spent.
totally inaccurate. Outside of what we were talking about.
When he says inaccurate, just edit that part out.
Yeah.
You also, and how we primarily know each other is through jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
How did you get into jiu-jitsu? Where? When? Tell me about your start.
Starting jiu-jitsu. Okay, kind of a random thing starting jiu-jitsu. I had a friend, that's still a good friend of mine, was writing for like a paper, like a sports publication, and I think it was maybe just an online thing. But he was going to go interview a jiu-jitsu instructor who had a school there, and in Milwaukee, where I was living at the time. And he just asked me if I'd go with him and check out this guy's class and school. And so I went to a jiu-jitsu class, and it was in this pretty divey, I guess I would call it, gym. And
Do you say gym with air quotes?
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, it was certainly a gym, but it was definitely like not the most family comfortable high class establishment. It's
Okay.
like, but it was awesome. That was like part of the thing that I loved about it. Was like it was this kind of like hole in the wall place, and jiu-jitsu blew my mind, and I was excited about it. I mean, I had vague ideas about what jiu-jitsu was, but you know, they were mostly wrong ideas. And I just started training there with these guys, and it was like super fun. Like
And
lots.
where was this?
This is in Milwaukee. This is a place
Okay.
called Neutral Ground.
Nice.
And the instructor's name is John Friedland, and he's an MMA fighter, and he was one of the 2 black belts in Wisconsin at the time. So, and yeah, so that's where it started. I was still touring full time then, so I was pretty slow to progress at jiu-jitsu, and I also didn't have the best kind of training mindset to learn, because mostly I was just trying to not die when rolling with a bunch of maniacs, you know, because they were like, it was like such a strange environment, because it was like kind of a boys club, you know, like guys that just like party together, and like there would be open mats on the weekends where everyone was just drinking vodka, and like then they would all go out after and stuff. So it was like, it's pretty I don't know, kind of a like frat element to it almost. You
Was
know?
it gi
Like,
or no gi, both?
it was gi and no gi, depending on 2 days
Okay.
a week was gi, 2 days a week was no gi. And man, I don't think I owned a gi for the first couple months though. I just did no gi to start.
Nice.
But yeah, got pretty serious about it at some point and just like fell in love with it, as one does. And I've been doing it since, and got my black belt like a year and a few months ago.
Nice. And yesterday was also a big anniversary for you.
That's right. Yeah. So one of my friends sent me a this day in history thing from Facebook or whatever, and it was like, was it 9 years ago?
Uh-huh.
9 years ago. Yeah. So he was just congratulating me on getting my blue belt.
You've come so far.
I know.
Then you got your black belt. You say a year and a half ago, somewhere around there.
Yeah, in April of last year.
What was that like?
Getting the black belt itself. It was funny. It was like kind of anticlimactic in a way. The actual moment of getting my black belt was funny, because I had gone a week prior. One of my best friends lives in Portland, and like I talked him into doing jiu-jitsu actually after many years of bugging him about it, because I knew he'd love it, and he was getting his blue belt. So
Nice.
I drove out to Portland, and he didn't know he was getting Ironman for his blue belt, because he trains at SBG out there. So they do a nice big Ironman ceremony, and I kind of surprised him and showed up and rolled with him to get his belt. It was an awesome, special moment. And like a week or 2 weeks later, we were going to do a seminar, and I kind of knew that I was going to get my black belt. And he walked in the door and like showed up, surprised me
Nice.
being there. But like he came in, and like, so I definitely knew it was on at that point. But we were like waiting for some other people to show up, because I was getting my black belt with a few other people, and like, so we did it. It just happened in the middle of this seminar, and it was kind of like unceremonious. A couple weeks later, we did a nice full Ironman, and
Yes, I
did
remember.
our nice promotion ceremony, and that was great.
So did you know it all beforehand, or did you just kind of understand that you were
I
going to
mean,
be
I
getting
suspected it was coming.
Uh-huh.
I had a bit of a scare at a camp a couple, like 6 months earlier or something, where I was like, oh no, are they going to give me my black belt right now? I was like, I don't want my black belt right now.
the first wave of black belts?
Yeah, and so after that, like I didn't get it, and I was like kind of relieved. But at the same time, after like in those months after that, I was like, maybe I'm ready. You know, it kind of forced its way into my head, you know,
Nice.
where it's like I really didn't want it. I was like, I might be much happier being a good brown belt. You know, like there's no pressure doing that.
And once you're a
really,
black
you know.
belt, it's on.
Once
You
you're a
are
black
a
belt,
black
there's
belt.
kind of like some more expectations, and yeah. So in those months, I just kind of like accepted that was impending, and like made peace with it, and like kind of maybe felt better about it, like after spending some time with it. And so when it did come, I was happy, and you know, obviously really proud to have made it there, because it's been a target point in my map of where I want to go for so many years.
As it is for most people.
Yeah.
So after the seminar, did it kind of settle in and you celebrated or anything like that? Or did you have any time to kind of reflect on it, even though it was very unceremonious at the time?
I mean, I went out to eat with the friend that came to town, and then he just drove back to Portland like moments later. You know, we spent like 30 minutes together or whatever, and then he had to like get on the road. But it's like pretty special that we both were there for each other on our promotions within a week. But it took time to like feel right about it, you know, and I would put it on and just be like, this is weird, you know.
Are they sure?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, one adjusts. It's just, you know, you try not to give it more weight than it needs. You know, like it's a symbol, it's representative of something. You know, and it's not really decided by me, but but it does have meaning. You know, it's like it's something that's like it's emblematic and you know something I am proud of. So it's weird that it exists in both those spaces where it's like it is important, but it's not important.
Sure. I did probably just determined by the value you put on it.
Totally.
More than anything.
As anything is, right?
I mean, I can say we've rolled plenty of times. You definitely feel like a black belt.
Thank you, man.
It's awful. It's just awful. So you started doing jiu-jitsu in Milwaukee.
Yes.
You got your black belt in Boise.
Right. Yeah. So I moved out here to Boise in 2010, and I was still a white belt, and started training here. And I didn't let you finish your question. How did I what?
You're there.
That's what I was assuming.
How did you get here from there, and why?
So my fiance's family's from here, and she moved back here when she was pregnant with our first son. And it's funny because this is like a really common question that people ask, like when they find out you're not from a place. Maybe I didn't know this. Maybe this happens everywhere, or maybe it's an Idaho thing. I'm not sure. But like, because I grew up in Wisconsin and like kind of lived there through college and like into my whole 20s essentially. And I didn't realize that if you weren't from a place, they ask you, why are you here?
Yeah.
Or maybe that's just an Idaho thing. It just makes sense. And I have like this really short answer that I give, and I realize it's kind of like a cheap answer because it's not totally true, where I just say like, you know, my girlfriend and I moved back here to be near her parents when she was having a baby, right, our first kid. Which is true, but it's also like just a really loose sketch of what was happening because our relationship was like pretty strange at the time.
Sure.
Like it wasn't rock solid. I was touring a lot, so it's like we were boyfriend and girlfriend, but it was like kind of falling apart at the time. And she originally like moved back here without me, and I was left in Wisconsin to decide whether or not I was going to come here, be with her, be a dad, you know, and put it back together, or just let it go and be out here and stay in Wisconsin and, you know, do my thing. So, so naturally, you know, as you know, from where we're sitting right now, I came out and put the family back together, and, you know, we had a kid, and like, we're figuring out ourselves as I moved to a whole new place and kind of left my life behind. And it was a pretty wild time for me, you know,
Interesting.
coming out here.
That is quite the change.
But honestly, jiu-jitsu was one of the things that like made it work, because like you can just go to a new place, and like if you find people to train with, like that's how I found someone to give me a job. You know, that's because I'm, you know, pretty unemployable coming here, like with no work history, just having been on tour for 8 or 9 years. You know, like what was the last job you had? It's like, well, I'm
in this band.
Remember, yeah. And I mean, I don't think people understand that like being in a band gives you a lot of skills if you're doing it on an independent level, because you have to do everything yourself. You know what I mean? Like I could probably take on most managerial or accounting or business type jobs, you know, just with the work experience I have doing an independent band, because I have to do all those things, you know. But I digress. Like I came here and started training right away. Like I found a place to train before I even moved here, and so didn't really miss a beat, like transitioning to coming here. And yeah, got my blue belt and purple belt from this guy Mitch Coates, who I started with training with here, and around that time came to the gym that you're at as a purple belt, pretty early on purple belt, and started training at SBG.
So just like I asked, why did you move from Wisconsin to Boise? Why did you move from a different gym to SBG?
It was a better fit for me.
Okay.
There were some I guess leadership choices at the other one that I like wasn't vibing with, and I felt like the students and the overall like experience of the gym were kind of less important to the leadership there than maybe some other ego issues and like appearance issues, and like it didn't work for me. So I have a lot of like training partners there that I still am good friends with, and like there's so many great people, so it's just like kind of a few specific things that made me have to try something new, and it just landed in a much better like fit for me.
You gotta find the right fit.
Totally.
Nothing personal, you just gotta find the right fit.
Totally true.
When did you start instructing jiu-jitsu?
Man, maybe 4 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, I think I was still a purple belt when I started to. And even before that, honestly, like before I switched to SBG, I was teaching here and there, just as needed.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a women's class at my previous gym, and there was kind of only one higher belted girl that was teaching that class, and she asked me to kind of keep the women's class going, weirdly enough, when she left, because she moved to a different state. And so for a little while I was teaching a women's class there, because I didn't want to see it go away just because that girl left, and it wasn't really there weren't enough people like supporting it. I feel like like that was kind of one of the issues, honestly. It was like I don't feel like at that gym they were like trying to support women enough in training. Like they kind of just like were like, well, they'll figure it out, it'll be fine, you know. Like,
Sure.
that is a weird attitude.
They'll hang or
about
they
it.
won't.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a weird attitude to have about jiu-jitsu in general. You know what
Totally.
I mean? It's like we shouldn't be weeding people out, right? Like
Sure.
we gotta. The goal is to kind of like build people up and make their strength stronger.
You
right?
think it kind of
know?
goes back to that, like you talked about it earlier, almost that like boys club mentality.
Right.
Just
totally.
like you're gonna jump in, you're one of us, or you're not, and we don't really
Yeah,
care
and either
which.
you get tougher or you leave.
Yeah.
You know, and like that's not the best way to learn, you know, and like but nonetheless, that was one of my first teaching experiences, was salvaging this women's class. And it was great. It was really cool. I really liked it. But yeah, I became a more regular teacher kind of around the time I was getting my brown belt, or just before.
What were you teaching?
I was teaching, I think, just advanced class at that point for adults, because now I teach kids and like foundations, like beginner classes, more regularly. But yeah, initially I just was teaching an evening,
Just a regular class.
intermediate, advanced jiu-jitsu class.
Whatever
yeah.
you wanted to teach.
Whatever I
just
wanted. There
go
wasn't
in and
really a
teach some
curriculum.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the vibe.
And now you're teaching kids. How is teaching kids different from teaching adults, like specifically jiu-jitsu?
It's a lot more about managing the energy of the room than it is about the specifics of jiu-jitsu.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Keep kids' attention and
Yeah, and it
On
varies so
point.
much by age group, and keep them like challenged an appropriate amount. I mean, I think that's an important element of teaching adults, but like adults know to kind of bring themselves back in and engage. You know what I mean? Because usually people that are doing martial arts and things like are motivated to do it for outside reasons. Like
Right.
if you don't keep a kid engaged, it's like they're out of there, like mentally. You know, they're not bringing themselves back if you don't do a good job like keeping them psyched on it.
that's fair. That is fair. I can see it. I can see it when I watch the kids' class that you're like constantly just making sure it's like you're just making like exactly what you said, making sure everybody's engaged, making sure everybody's paying attention by having fun. You're not
Right.
like you're not over disciplining everybody.
And
You're
even
just,
not
like,
getting
pay
sleepy, just
attention.
like get up and do 20 jumping jacks
Sure.
right now before
Let's
we do
play a
another
game.
thing, because you guys are all kind of like droopy. Yeah, let's play a game.
Game
like
that has
key.
nothing to do with jiu-jitsu. Let's just
Well, and
maybe
as long
it's
as it
got
has to
some
do with
application
movement.
or
Yeah, as long as
whatever.
it's got to do with movement. Like the more you can like link games to the actual techniques, the better. You know, like so. And the more you can make techniques into games, even, is like probably a better way to look at it. You know, like the more you can just let some unconscious learning happen, you know, where it's like, I'm going to put you in this position and here's one objective. Move this knee in front of the person. You know, so they'll get practice stopping
Makes
that.
sense.
And it's kind of a game, but it's also the technique, and an important part of the reason this position works
those
is
disguised reps.
yeah, you got to disguise those reps, and not even necessarily disguise them, just like let them play in those spots if they know like a little bit about, not even if they know, like just give them an apparatus to practice, you know, like. So, but I mean, that's true of adult jiu-jitsu as well. Like,
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. You teach foundations adults, you've taught advanced adults, you teach kids, and of course you've been a student yourself. Which is the hardest?
I think it's hardest to teach beginner adults, because it's so tempting as someone that spent almost a dozen years in jiu-jitsu to give people a lot. And I think that's one of the main errors that people make in teaching beginners is giving too much information or too much context or just talking too much or just like getting excited about it. And you have to sort of get over yourself a bit and like give people digestible things. Because, you know, of course, as a teacher, you want to be authentic and like tell them the truth and give them your perspective. So it's hard not to spit out a bunch of things at the same time. And if you're doing, for example, giving them a task where you're trying to prevent them from doing one thing, like regard. We have side control. We're trying to prevent someone from regarding. Like, it's hard not to talk about a bunch of different things and options and where they can go.
Sure.
So I think teaching beginners, you have to have the skill of trying to make something bite-sized and just give them one thing in a way that they can practice it. Because you can tell someone to move and you can tell them don't regard, but that's different than teaching them, right? Like, I think that's one of the main things I've learned as a teacher, and a lot of this comes from being a student of, because I've guested at a bunch of gyms. Like when I'm touring, I go around and like I've had a bunch of different teachers, and like some of them are bad, you know. And I've had like a bunch of people that like kind of just will say a move to you, and that's not teaching you a move. Like, this is a move, like this is how it goes, and they'll walk you through it, and maybe they'll talk about it for a while and give you perspective on it, but that doesn't mean that the class has learned the move or learned the importance or learned what's happening with it. So I think that
it's like if they're like showing a triangle and they're like, you throw the legs up, you lock this here, pull the head down, boom, triangle. Okay, go.
Yeah, even if they tell you every single thing that's important about a triangle, if you're not doing those things with your body, like in a drill or in a way that where someone's trying to resist against you and stop you, then you're not doing the unconscious portion of learning, right? Like, I think that I'm starting to realize more that there's two aspects to learning something, which is this like unconscious thing that we do when we're like rolling and sparring and drilling, and where your body just knows what something feels like.
Sure.
And you feel the difference of what leverage is happening or what you're trying to apply. And you know what the resistance and the reaction is, and that fits into a framework of like movement. But you don't necessarily like have that all in a place so you can articulate it, and you don't necessarily haven't necessarily reasoned all that out and figured out like, this is why I'm doing this, or this is what I'm even doing. Like, in teaching, you have to exercise the other portion of it, which is explaining the conscious aspect of it, which is why I'm doing this and how it works. And then putting people in a position where they can internalize that and make it unconscious. So you have to create a drill or create a class where it's not just them walking through it a couple times. Because that's the traditional model of teaching, right? In jiu-jitsu, it's like, here's the move, walk through it a couple times, good work. Get a drink, let's roll for 40 minutes. You know, like, I think like the more you can have unconscious, which is like learning with your body and in the moment learning with why is this happening and what are the apparatus that make this happen. If you can combine those things and have both, that's something really powerful. You know? So I think everyone should teach, because it forces you to do that and forces you to kind of like, and you can just be a bad teacher. You can just show people moves too. That's fine. But like, the more you want to make people understand, because you'll see it happen. You know what I mean? When you're teaching someone, especially beginners, like when they don't have any frame of reference and you give them a bunch of information, like you'll see how they try and apply it. You know what I mean? And if you give them both of those things, where you give them a conscious understanding of what they're trying to do, where they're trying to go, and then you put them in a drill where they can make their body do that a few times and feel what it feels like to be wrong, and feels what it feels like to be almost right, and feels what it feels like to be like really almost right when someone's trying to stop you, and then doing it right when someone stops you. Like, they have learned that. They've internalized it. Something like actually has happened there. Like, that's the goal. So it's a pretty long answer.
That's fine. That's fine. So what do you think is the most beneficial way to sort of construct a class?
I think it has to have isolation, right? So I think you have to look at look at a position or technique, and you have to put someone in that position and let them know what they're trying to do, and then make them try and do it a few times. You know what I mean? And make them try and do each of the aspects on their own as much as you can, and then integrate it back together, right? Like, so isolating things down to their pieces and making them actually do the unconscious part, because most often where teaching can go wrong, and like I'm not saying I'm not guilty of this, but like what I'm striving to not do is where this can go wrong is like you will give them the main portion and then you will mention the rest, right? But in all those details that you mention, it's the same problem, right? You're telling them the problem. You're not teaching them what the problem is or how to fix it, right? So you can give people warnings, and you should, but you should also let them apply those warnings as much as you can in their parts. And it's also a scale, so that you can be on one end or other of the spectrum where you're giving too many details and giving too much of this, and I think that's a problem too. So I think really pacing is the biggest challenge as a teacher, and and learning as well. Like, how much do you drill, how much do you roll, and how much do you just walk through techniques and try and add to your library of moves? And it's all got to be the right pace and the right quantity, because too much details and too much and too many isn't always better, right? It's like 1,000 moves that you're going to be bad at is definitely not better than 10 moves that you're awesome at.
Totally. I mean, people can practice things 1,000 times, and if they're practicing it poorly, you've just built a really bad habit.
Sure.
That you're
totally.
It's going to be really difficult to undo.
Yeah, that's why you got to have good partners that are going to resist you and not smash you, let you learn, but like, let you be challenged. And
progressive resistance, right?
Progressive resistance, exactly. And not everyone knows that. That's into jiu-jitsu. Like, that's really our culture in our gym, which we're really good about, is like developing that in our training partners, is like resistance that is at an optimal level for learning, right? Which is not someone stressed out and like freaking out, like they got to be calm and relaxed and not think that someone's actually putting them in danger.
Right.
Because then you can operate in a way where you're thinking rationally, and but also they're not just letting you do something and letting you walk all over them, because that doesn't do anything. That doesn't let you operate the actual apparatus that is what you're trying to do. You need something, you need a challenge, and you need that challenge to increase as your ability to do it increases.
Those two things that you hit right there sum up way too much time that I spent in jiu-jitsu classes. Was we'd go through a move and your partner would just be a rag doll, so you could figure out all the intricacies that your coach was telling you.
Yep.
Zero resistance, just a rag doll.
Yeah.
You can move any part of them you want, and they're just a dummy.
Yeah.
And then you'd move on to the next move. Same thing. You move on to the next move. That's like the traditional jiu-jitsu models. Okay, here's move A. Awesome. Do it with your partner. Great. Let them do it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Here's variation B, where we do the Kimura off of it instead of the triangle. Whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. You do it. You do it. Awesome. Here's variation C. You do it. You do it. Great. You feel like you got it? Sure. Awesome. Okay. Roll. Oh, and I really want to see you guys hit that thing that we just learned. Let's really see that triangle or that sweep that we just learned. And now you've gone from your partner being a rag doll and doing nothing at all to them going 100% because you're rolling, and they are actively trying to reverse engineer the thing that you just learned.
Right.
And so I can't tell you how many moves I've learned, quote unquote learned, that did not stick with me past that class for that exact reason.
Yeah, that's what I call move telling. You're telling someone a move. You're not teaching it to them, right? Like, all the learning happens in that area in between where you're talking about, between ragdoll and like full Wolverine that's like attacking you, right?
Totally.
So like you need to add that stress incrementally, and if you're gonna learn things. So like that should be your whole goal as a teacher, is to create that level of resistance and make them do it a bunch of times in that level, right? Because like in full Wolverine mode, you're gonna be in 10 different positions at high speeds, right?
Yeah.
Like, we got to slow it down, and we got to keep resetting you in that same position, just so your body can do the unconscious part of the learning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you traditionally will learn a move that here's step A, step B, step C, step D, and then the submission or whatever. And then when you go to roll or to train with resistance, you set up step A, and they block step B, and now C through the submission are irrelevant. And therefore, you're never going to gain like that whole sequence or move or concept or whatever it is.
Right.
And so I feel like it almost stunts people's growth to a certain degree.
Yeah, which is, thinking of moving gyms too, like this is one of the reasons I'm really happy to have found myself at SBG, is because this kind of idea is so ingrained in the culture of the gym. Right? Like this is like our whole goal is like to be better teachers and better students and like find the sweet spot of learning,
Totally.
And like I'm super grateful to have had it put in these terms for me, because I'm not sure how many years it would have taken me to arrive at that conclusion on my own, or maybe never, and I would have had, a lot of tendinitis by then.
Right, and a lot of bad habits.
Yeah, for sure.
Teaching jiu-jitsu is a whole new world of just difficulty for me. It is.
But it's great, man.
It's so especially coming from, like, I coached boxing for many years, and boxing, I love boxing, but boxing is extremely simple. It is extremely simple. Everything comes off of one stance. You only move so many ways. There's 5 punches plus body shots. There's 3 main forms of defending yourself. And then there's sort of the different combinations, which don't get very long. I mean, any real boxing, 3-4 combinations with some defense mixed in there, that's about as crazy as it gets.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to get to a certain point with boxing.
So it's a more manageable curriculum.
So much more manageable. Yeah. I mean, just the stance alone. Boxing, everything you do in boxing comes off of the same stance.
Right.
In jiu-jitsu, there's like, we got to talk mount top, out bottom, side control top, side control bottom, guard top, guard bottom, half guard bottom, etc. I mean, those are all
open guard, standing.
Standing.
Yeah.
And in my brain, I kind of view those all as like the quote unquote stances, that you would start with or get to or build off of, I would say.
Right.
And it's far more complicated, and especially like you were talking about, not falling into the pitfalls, especially with beginners, of I really have to be extremely thoughtful when I explain something, because what terminology makes sense to me as a purple belt, they've literally never heard before.
No doubt.
Okay, we're going to start from guard, and somebody raises their hand, and they're like, what do you mean? What is guard?
Yeah,
I'm like,
totally.
oh, right. Or like, okay, from here, awesome, we're going to set this up, and then we're going to hip out, and everybody just stops and looks at each other, and I'm like, we need to talk about shrimping.
Yeah.
Or
totally.
something like that.
Totally.
And then you really have to break it down really, really fine, and it is extremely difficult. I almost feel like when I work with people or do privates, or even if I just work with a buddy one-on-one that's more advanced, it's way easier to show them something.
Because you know where they're at, or
just because they'll understand the terminology, or I'll say cool, there's this really cool sweep from half guard, and they just jump right into half guard, and I'm like, great, and you grab here and you do this, and just they understand certain things. Where with the foundations class, it's so challenging to just everything that you show, you need to understand that everyone in the room, it's their first time experiencing any part of that at all, from the position to if there's a submission involved, but from the position to the posture to where your hips go, to simple things like hipping out, or feet go here, or this is why this is important, this is why we re-guard, to get the legs back involved, to control our opponent, just stuff that I take for granted, where I have to go, you really need to break this down into super digestible bites.
Here's the thing, I would way rather have that blank slate where I have to reset someone's or take someone's notions from 0 to 1 of what any of those things are, than someone that's got really bad ideas about what those things, they've trained somewhere else, or less so that than they're casual MMA fans 100%. And have been poking around on YouTube for a couple 100%. Months thinking about doing jiu-jitsu,
right.
And they've just got a bunch of the weirdest fringe information, and they have taken as gospel, and you have to kind of undo that and then start again, like I'd way rather have
100%
yeah.
know what you mean. It's
Yeah.
just like when I coach boxing, when people come in and they go, I've never done anything like this before, I go, perfect. And when the person comes in that was like, yeah, I spent 5 years doing Kempo, I go, oh, fuck.
Yeah. Right.
Because it's exactly what you said. Like, I talk about stance, and then they stand the way that they've stood for 5 years, thinking that, like, that's the way any fighter should stand. And I'm just like, I have some hard news for you to understand that this is nonsense, and we need to adjust this. And even if they have a very willing mind, their body has done it so many times that standing a certain way or throwing a punch a certain way, I mean, they've done that 10,000 times. So now I have to undo, like you're talking about, so much more just to get them to zero to build off of. And then you can kind of build from there. So I agree. I 100% agree. 100% agree that the blank slate is way better. I also, it's like what you were talking about earlier, is it's hard to kind of not get overly excited when you're doing something, because it's like not everybody's on the same wavelength you are at the time.
Totally. Yeah, no one knows what you're talking about. It's okay, just save it. Less is so much more in those situations, and even with some advanced students, it's like you take for granted teaching advanced students that they know everything you're talking about, but also attention spans are such that it's like, you have to talk the right amount. Like if you talk too much, even if it's stuff that they're super interested in, like I could be talking to another black belt and they could be telling me about a position, but if I don't get a chance to like play around in there, I'm going to start losing track of what the hell they're talking about after a certain level. You know what I mean? Like
totally fair.
So you got to put their hands on it too, so if you don't, like, this is funny because this kind of calls back to like something I think about now as a parent, which is like, I remember a ton of things that my parents told me when I was growing up, or like a teacher told me, that made sense intellectually to me, like as a idea, but I didn't apply at all in my life. And it's something that I've had to learn as an adult. I can't think of a great example right now, but like all these, even lessons about like, humility or just like generosity or anything. It's like, I've been told that, but I didn't learn it as a kid. You know what I mean? Probably everything I needed to succeed as a human, like my mom and dad told me, like they're great parents and they wanted, to instill these things in me. But like, you don't learn by being told.
True. Absolutely true. Yeah. I mean, boy, a lot of my learning comes from just failing and just coming back and going, okay, they were right. Yeah, that's true. As a coach, you're a black belt. You give out stripes. You give out belts. Of course, that's a very hot button issue, especially early on with people who are super extrinsically motivated. And that's fine. I mean, people geek out on that kind of stuff. But as a black belt, what do you look for when you're advancing someone, whether it be a stripe or a belt?
Depends on the belt. Like, there's different things I'm looking for. So
let's start with stripes. Just your general everyday stripes.
So
stripe to stripe.
Okay.
Or does it still depend on the belt?
I guess it still depends on the belt too. And white belt too is different because I think the first couple are just based on it, like consistency.
You're still here.
Yeah.
You're still here. You're showing up. You want to be here. That's cool.
Yeah, exactly. You've come and done the things that we've asked you to do.
So what are you looking for when you give someone a blue belt?
That's a great one. So I'm gonna mostly paraphrase John Frankel, one of my coaches, one of our coaches.
Boy, if that's the 1,000th time I've heard that phrase, but go on.
I'm gonna paraphrase John Frankel.
Exactly.
I mean, he's a great guy to paraphrase. He said his criteria for blue belt, which I think is smart, is that if you're someone that's responding with jiu-jitsu, like you look at our main positions that you were listing off a minute ago, mount top, mount bottom, whatever, you go through the kind of like main run of those. If in each of those positions the primary things that you're doing as responses are jiu-jitsu, then you're a blue belt, right? So if I put you in any position and give you like some of the main reactions that you would get in a position, some of the main resistances that you would get, on tops in side control or mount, back control, guard. If your responses to those are jiu-jitsu in each of those cases, then you're a blue belt. If your responses to those are like muscle or spazzing or
flopping like a fish,
just trying to find your way out blindly, yeah, then you're still a white belt. So, and I think as we get closer to that on stripe wise, I'm looking for the makings of that. Like I'm looking, you know, if I'm looking at giving you your 4th stripe on your white belt, it's like you're approaching that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in most of those cases, the fewer and fewer of those cases that you are responding with total nonsense,
mm-hmm.
then the closer you are to that next stripe, to that next belt.
What about when you're considering someone for purple belt? What's your criteria?
Purple belt is more about fluency and effectiveness, right? So like you're doing these things, even the blue belt that's responding with jiu-jitsu, it's not always working. You
Sure.
know what I mean? Like they're doing the right thing, but they're just doing it slower or
mm-hmm.
in the wrong direction, or not the wrong direction, but not, you know, totally focused, or their timing's off, you know. So I think purple belt's about doing it well. Like, so you're making smart jiu-jitsu responses, not beating people necessarily, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of more some of the higher belt stuff. Like brown belt, I think, is more about being dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And, with your jiu-jitsu, not about being dangerous with, I don't know, the one thing you're good at, but
right.
with a lot of things. Like, so for purple belt, it's more about being effective with jiu-jitsu in all these spots, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
do you have effective and good and fluent jiu-jitsu that goes from a jiu-jitsu thing? Like, and I know this is kind of like a blanket, but like, maybe it's vague, but it makes sense to me, so I'll just say it. Like, if you're using jiu-jitsu from this position and you transition to jiu-jitsu at the next point, like, there's not a big gap in between you doing jiu-jitsu and then finding yourself in that other position.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if I'm looking for your blue belt, maybe there's a big scramble thing with no kind of technique in it,
mm-hmm.
and there's a total blind spot in between those positions, then so be it. But that blind spot has to get smaller and smaller towards purple belt. Right, like even in the transition between this one spot here, half guard, and them regarding, you should still be using jiu-jitsu responses.
And then brown belt is when you start to become a little bit more dangerous with all of that.
Yes, yeah. Brown belt is like you're dangerous to everybody, and you're effective, smooth. You wonder if this person should be a black belt, then they're wrong.
That's kind of the common consensus I get from everybody, is brown belt is sort of preliminary black belt, just sort of spending a year or two just tightening some things up. But other than that, you're all but a preliminary black belt.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Sounds about right. And have you given out brown belts, purple belts?
No, just there's. Have I given out? I haven't given out brown belts. I've given purple belts. I mean, I'm in the conversation with all the other black belts at the gym for all the belts we give.
Sure.
Not a ton of them are my students, so usually I don't end up being the one giving the belt, but I definitely have given some blue belts.
Fully, I guess I'm a different case, so it doesn't matter. But I don't, to this day, fully understand like how that works as far as belt. Like I get it when like you have an exclusive student in your class that you teach all the time, and then they're gonna get their blue belt or
mm-hmm.
whatever, and then it's like, oh, that makes sense. But then there's like, I don't know, maybe some of us weird amorphous people that just sort of
flop around,
float from coach to coach, and then it's like
it gets harder.
Who's gonna get a belt? Who's gonna belt? And it's like, and then it's like, hey, who's gonna give you your belt? I don't really have a coach. I don't really know. Whatever.
Yeah.
But I guess most of it, you guys probably do have like a lot of core primary students that it's probably pretty obvious for the most part.
A lot of times it is, but sometimes it isn't, man. It's kind of a blurry thing. And I think we have a much more modern gym, like kind of the old school setup is more like there's one kind of head instructor, black belt. You know, there's a master.
So everybody's under him.
Everyone's under him, like,
right.
And he's giving all the belts. And this person is there for most of the classes and knows everybody in the smaller gym format. We have a pretty big modern gym, you know,
sure.
like, and people are training different arts and like, people are showing up different hours of the day,
Different
to get their training
classes,
in,
yeah.
different coaches. Because we have so many people, we can't have one head instructor, you know.
Sure.
And also, we don't really have someone that founded the gym that was way above everyone else in jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? Like, we have a few people that, like, kind of in my era that got our black belts together.
I mean, there's basically within 6 months 6 black belts, and you all kind of went,
Right.
you know, pretty. I mean, 6 months at the time seemed like a while, but in retrospect, it's basically all together. There's
Right.
6 of you
Yeah, yeah.
that all got it together.
Yeah.
And you're all the black belts.
Right. Yeah, so we don't have that traditional, like, one grandmaster in the room, you know,
Yeah.
thing. So it's like the belt system is kind of like an heirloom of that. And, you know, so, yeah, I get it's blurry sometimes. And like I said before, it's like we give sometimes too much credit to the symbol of the belt that's on people.
For sure.
That's just someone deciding what they think about your skill. You know, it's
Sure.
not it's not a hard and fast measurement, you know, and it's like different in a lot of different schools and a lot of different places. So it's like sometimes you can give it too much meaning.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think even within our gym itself, like, you just take the blue belt, for example, there's, like, people who've gotten their blue belts. I've seen 15 different versions of somebody who's gotten their blue belt. Like, somebody, it's because, like, they're not athletic, they have a harder time, but, I mean, they're learning well, they're a good student, they're, you know, whatever, and they've gotten to a point to where people, or they've kind of become appreciated. But, you know, maybe like the other person who got their blue belt that day, if they competed, one person would win 10 out of 10 times if we're talking about winning. But it's not always about that. It's
Totally.
not. It's
Well, that's
not
why I
just
think
about, like,
Frankel's
who can crush who.
That's why I think Frankel's criteria is really good. It's because, like, one person's much older, much less athletic, or one person's
Yeah.
much larger, and it can't be based on who's beating who, right?
Totally,
It has to be
totally.
because the competition is against the version of yourself from a year ago. You know what I mean? How much
Right.
better is your jiu-jitsu than Cameron 1 year ago?
Relative progress over yourself.
Yeah. So looking at it as how much of these responses are good jiu-jitsu is a great way to measure it without having all those external things come into it.
Yeah. That makes sense. That's good advice from a black belt. Another thing with jiu-jitsu that I've been excited about lately is I am a jiu-jitsu nerd outside of the gym as well, watching competitions, following athletes, et cetera, et cetera. And you recently have really immersed yourself into the fold of starting to nerd out, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
And watching the sport?
And watching the sport, yes. Following
a
certain
little
people's
bit. Here and
careers.
there. I dabble.
You dabble. You dabble more than anybody else. So that's much appreciated. It's kind of because you have a side project. Can we call it a side project? What is it?
I have a potential project.
Potential project.
Yeah, where I would maybe be doing somewhat of a, like, kind of news roundup for jiu-jitsu, for a jiu-jitsu publisher who wants to do some, like, audio work, because I do work in, like, recording studio in the music world.
Sure.
And I have been talking to a jiu-jitsu publication about potentially doing kind of audio content of their material, their articles and stuff. So for a little while, it was looking like I was going to have to be more dialed into what was going on. Not really sure what that project's going to look like when it does see the light of day. There's some questions about that at the moment, but it might involve me putting some news out there. So I all of a sudden started just trying to catch up.
Nice.
So that was a lot of the motivation of me watching, like, jumping in and watching a bunch of, like, kind of the bigger promotions. And
Did you stumble across anything that excited you, or anyone? Or?
I just found that I was more interested now than I was. Like, I had watched competitions and tried to get into it years ago. Like, maybe it was like a blue belt, and, like, everyone's so good at, like, watching black belts. I was like, they can't do anything to each other. You know what I mean? Like, everyone's defense is so amazing. I was like watching it. It's like, if you're losing track of some of the subtleties, like, it can be not exciting.
Totally.
You know, and so, but having just, like, a much better understanding of a lot of those subtleties and being where I'm at now, I do find it a lot more exciting, a lot more interesting, and I love that there's a lot more events and promotions and, like, stages for grappling to be on as it grows and grows. And I think that's really exciting that we have, like, you know, household name personalities, like, in jiu-jitsu that are winning competitions, you know, and, like, and it's not
Absolutely.
yeah, so it's cool to see the sport in big venues, you know, like so I'm psyched on it. I'll be watching more of it.
Sweet, awesome. So we can hang out and talk about Pearl Jam and Mikey Moose and Meshi sometime.
100%. Yes, I would love to do that.
Sweet. Awesome. I'm excited. Well, I about a half hour ago forgot we were recording, and we were just talking about jiu-jitsu and music, so that's pretty cool. But I appreciate you coming down to hang out and talk about music and jiu-jitsu and your story.
We'll
and
have to do it again, man.
And all that stuff.
Fun.
I think I've said and more times than all the other podcasts combined because I forgot that we were recording. Tim, edit those out. Appreciate it.
That's a good thing. Though,
Appreciate it.
This is what a actual
just hanging out,
conversation
talking
between
about
Cameron and I sounds like.
Exactly.
We'll have another one tomorrow.
Ryan sounds very educated, and I sound like I'm just lost in Ryan's voice. Yes, that's exactly what they sound
that's
like.
why you gotta take the headphones off. It's hypnotic.
Totally. Once again, man, I appreciate you coming down and hanging out, talking some jits, talking some music. Had a good time.
It's been my
just
pleasure.
Kicking out. You and I do this off the record a lot, so
True
to put it down is pretty fun. I know when we were talking about music, Tim was super involved, and as soon as we started talking about jiu-jitsu, he got on his phone.
Just like you were saying. I get quiet. I don't know anything about
we lost him. We lost him. He's back.
What's up, everybody?
Yeah, when we turn it off, we'll talk more about hip-hop after this.
Yeah, we can totally do that.
Totally. Well, thanks for coming down, man. Appreciate it. Anybody you want to, I don't know, shout out? Say howdy to?
Just
me.
you, buddy.
Awesome. Appreciate
Follow
it.
the band at where?
Misery Signals. So at Misery Signals on Instagram and Twitter, and just I don't know how to use Facebook, but I'm pretty sure you just put Misery Signals into one of those fields and it'll be there.
Yep.
Get us back up to 100,000 followers, please. I don't know.
Yeah, you dropped below. You're at 97 now.
Yeah, it's embarrassing.
We'll get you back up.
Thanks.
Get you back up.
Yeah, we'll push it.
Free roll audience has got to be 10K at least following the Facebook after this.
Well, minus the
day.
K. Yeah, there's about 11 out there. But I love every one of you and I appreciate it. Now that I had a rock star on, it's going to go crazy.
Could be.
Awesome. Well, thanks, dude. Appreciate you coming down. Tim, any shout outs?
No, dude. Just a shout out to you guys. Thanks for coming in and providing awesome content. Like, let me geek out for the first hour with you guys, and then getting lost in the second hour.
Fading a bit from there. That's all right.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah. No shout outs. But
shout out Garth Brooks.
Shout out Garth Brooks. It was actually really popping outside of Garth Brooks last night. Everywhere I went.
It was
but the rodeo was going too, and the rodeo was popping. So, like, he didn't take everybody from the valley.
That's why people from Idaho ask why you're here, because we have Garth Brooks and rodeos, and you're from
on
Wisconsin.
The same weekend.
And we go, why did you come here? Why did you come here?
Yeah.
We love it. Anytime anybody moves here, I'm always fascinated as to, like, why.
What are you doing?
Especially, like, people from different countries. When I meet someone from a different country.
Yeah.
Like, I got a buddy from Iraq, and I'm just like,
yeah,
why?
I'm surprised they've heard of it.
Boise. Yeah. Like, how did you get not like
'cause he's
San
in hiding,
Francisco
that's
or
why.
something? It's crazy. But so the rodeo. That's where we're going next. Right?
That's where we're going next, dude.
Next week's gonna be a fun show. We're gonna have the Wimped Warrior people on, a couple of the athletes, one of the coaches, talk about that experience. So that'll be cool.
Yeah.
How long till the fight night?
It is August 2nd.
Whoa.
Friday night.
Whoa.
August 2nd. So 2 weeks.
Cool.
Yeah, very exciting. Cool.
It's
Thanks
very
everybody
exciting.
for tuning in.
Yeah,
Later.
totally. And have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.